Hi friends, welcome back to easyhouse.com YouTube channel. And today we'll be looking at how can you use mutual funds to generate a regular income. So in this video, we'll be actually looking at how you can use dynamic funds to generate a regular income with less risk. By less risk, I mean the risk adjusted returns you can get. So the returns which you are generating over here is with lower risk as compared to other investment options in equity. So we'll be dividing this video into two parts. First is we'll be understanding what are dynamic funds and what are the advantages and which are the best dynamic funds we can invest into. And then second is how we can use dynamic funds to generate a regular income. Now, someone who is investing in FDs to generate this 6 or 7% return and post tax like 4.5 or 5% returns, he can look at this option and generate close to 8 to 10%, around 10% returns. And probably someone who's retired and has set aside probably in a FD or in an investment into a property of say 2 or 3 crores, and he's generating this regular income for himself, he can generate the same amount of regular income or the same amount of funds for his monthly expenses or his requirements with a lower amount. So I'll suggest you see both the parts in full, understand the video, and then see whether this helps you meet the requirement to generate that money with a lower amount as well. So let's start with exactly what are dynamic funds. So before I start, I'll just tell you to please subscribe to our video if you haven't done so, because if you do so, you stand a chance to win an Amazon Echo speaker worth 10,000 rupees. So please subscribe. So let's start with what are dynamic funds. So dynamic funds are a mix of equity and debt. So unlike a balanced fund, which doesn't have massive variations in equity and debt portfolio, a dynamic fund can invest 100% into equity or 100% in debt based on what the fund manager thinks. So whatever the fund manager feels at that point of time, depending on what the market is doing in the equity markets or the debt markets are doing, he'll keep on shifting his portfolio from debt to equity, right? So if he sees a view that the stocks are overvalued, so he'll move his portfolio more towards debt. And if he feels that the market is actually undervalued and he can get a good return from his equities, he'll increase his exposure into equities. Similarly, in the debt market, if he feels like moving his money to long term duration debt to get good capital appreciation, he can do that. So, all that asset allocation which you would be worried about, the fund manager is doing it on your behalf. Now, the reason why it is better to do that, leave that to the fund manager, is first, if you actually look at their number of people who've written papers, probably the gurus in finance who've done this work on asset allocation, and asset allocation tells you the way to actually to get a higher return with lower risk. The best way to do is to have a optimum asset allocation, and it does impact what your returns are going to be at a given risk level. So this is ideally what everyone would like to achieve for. So rather than you doing it, even you think that you're very good in finance, ideally what happens is emotions come in, and people will be, probably be very scared. Like in the last 1 year, people would have seen that after Corona, probably equity is not going to give you that return. So there is that element of emotion which is there, either a fear or excitement. So you might see markets right now and you say, okay, let me get all onto equity because equity is doing very great, right? And I assume it's going to will continue to do better. So a person will be driven by emotions, right? So when you have these fund managers who are doing it, who have a proven model or a model which has actually proved itself in the last 5 to 10 years and seen the different market scenarios and has generated returns, in that model, which is more hard coded or being formalized, the emotion part actually moves out. So there's no emotion involved. Second thing is when you do this financial planning or asset allocation yourself, you are not able to catch the up and down. And when you don't do that, your returns come down. Second is, even if the returns do not come down, the amount of risk you've taken to generate that return is much higher than what it should ideally be. And we do not sometimes recognize the risk which we've taken. Second thing is, when you do this asset allocation in different places and move your money, there's a tax implication which comes in, because if you invest into a property or invest into a debt, move that money out and put it into equity, there'll be a short term or a long term capital gain which will hit you on the transaction which you do. So that tax implication actually decreases your returns. But in a dynamic fund, we actually do not get that tax liability, because the fund manager and the team has actually done that tax planning for you to minimize your tax implication for that asset allocation. So these are the big advantages which are there of dynamic funds. So I'll just give you an example. Like if you're holding on to debt, so you're going to have a short-term capital gains if you don't hold that debt for more than 3 years. So these kind of tax implications are there if you have a higher investment into debt. So what these dynamic asset management fund managers do is they actually invest up to 65% of your money into equity funds. So your tax implication is equity always, and they take benefit of this, and hence you get a lower taxation on your debt part as well. So your debt will also be taxed as equity and not as debt. And how they do this? What they do is, say, imagine a fund manager sees that the market is actually peaked out, right? And he only has around 35 or 40% exposure into equity, and his 60% of money is left aside. So what he'll do is he'll use another 35% of his money and get into take arbitrage positions. And using arbitrage in equities, he'll generate a return, which normal finance guy will not be able to do. And because of that, his exposure into equities increases from 30, and the 35 he's putting into in arbitrage positions. So his investment into equities go up to 65%, and the rest he'll put it into a debt instrument, short or long term durations, and then generate the return. And hence that fund will be taxed as equity and not as debt. As an individual, when I do that asset allocation or you do that asset allocation, what we'll do is we'll move all that money, the remaining 70 rupees, into debt, and only have an exposure of 30 rupees into equities. So our 70% of the money will still have a debt taxation, and only a 30% of the money will have an equity taxation. Whereas in a dynamic fund, the entire 100 rupees is getting taxed as equity and not as debt. So he keeps on changing his arbitrage positions based on what the market conditions is. So if he's invested 65% or 70% into equities, he'll keep his arbitrage positions at zero and keep the rest into debt. That's how you get a equity taxation rather than a debt taxation on your funds. Now,